"You're nothing without me, and you never will be," Lucas shouted, his voice echoing through our apartment in Charleston, South Carolina. I stood there, frozen, still wearing the dress I had planned to wear for our final venue walkthrough. Our wedding was supposed to be in 5 days. 5 days. The invitations had been sent. The flowers ordered. My dress hanging in the closet like a ghost of the future I thought I was going to have. My name is Emma Hartwell, and I'm 28 years old. Until 3 days ago, I was a registered nurse working at Charleston General Hospital, planning my wedding to Lucas Bennett, the man I thought was the love of my life. We had been together for 4 years, engaged for 8 months, and I believed we were building something beautiful together. I had even given up my apartment 6 months ago to move in with him, thinking it was a step toward our shared future. But standing in that living room, watching Lucas pack his belongings into boxes while his friend Tyler helped load his car, I realized how naive I had been. The man I loved, the man I was supposed to marry on Saturday, was walking out of my life like I meant nothing to him. "I found someone else," he had said earlier that morning, his words cutting through me like a blade. "Someone who actually understands my ambitions. You're too comfortable, Emma. Too content with mediocrity." Those words still rang in my ears as I watched him take the last of his things. What hurt the most wasn't just the abandonment, it was the calculated cruelty of it all. He had waited until everything was finalized, until all the deposits were paid and non-refundable, until I had already taken time off work for our honeymoon. The timing felt deliberate, designed to cause maximum damage. "The lease is in my name," he said coldly, not even looking at me as he closed the final box. "You have until the end of the month to find somewhere else to live." 3 weeks. I had 3 weeks to find a new apartment, deal with the wedding cancellations, and somehow piece my life back together. My savings account, which had been healthy before we started planning the wedding, was now nearly empty. Between the dress, the venue deposit, the catering, and all the other expenses that came with planning what was supposed to be the perfect day, I was left with barely enough to cover a security deposit on a new place. As the door closed behind Lucas and Tyler, the apartment fell into an eerie silence. I looked around at the space that had felt like home just hours ago, and now felt like a mausoleum of broken dreams. Something deep in my chest told me this wasn't just about another woman. There was something else. Something darker in the way Lucas had looked at me before he left. But I pushed that feeling aside, focusing instead on the immediate crisis of rebuilding my entire life from scratch. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, frantically searching for job opportunities and apartments. My nursing position at Charleston General had been filled when I gave my notice, expecting to be on my honeymoon right now. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had arranged everything around a future that no longer existed. My phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Olivia. "Any luck with the job search?" I had called her the night before, sobbing into the phone as I explained what had happened. Olivia had been furious, calling Lucas every name in the book, but her anger couldn't pay my bills. "Still looking," I texted back. "Need something fast." As I scrolled through online job boards, one posting caught my attention. "Live-in caregiver position, immediate start, excellent compensation." The job was for a private client in the upscale area of downtown Charleston, and the pay was significantly higher than anything else I had seen. The requirements matched my qualifications perfectly. Registered nurse with experience in physical therapy and medication management. I clicked on the posting and read the details more carefully. The client was described as a 45-year-old male who had been injured in an accident 2 years ago and required assistance with daily activities. The position included room and board in a separate guest house on the property, plus a monthly salary that was almost twice what I had been making at the hospital. Something about it felt too good to be true, but desperation had a way of making even the most cautious person take risks. I needed a job immediately, and I needed a place to live. This position solved both problems at once. I spent the rest of the morning crafting a cover letter and updating my resume. By noon, I had submitted my application along with my nursing credentials and references. I tried not to get my hopes up, but I found myself refreshing my email every few minutes, hoping for a response. At 3 p.m., my phone rang. The caller identification showed a number I didn't recognize with a local area code. "Hello, this is Emma," I answered. "Miss Hartwell, this is Catherine Morrison. I'm calling regarding your application for the caregiver position. Mr. Blake was very impressed with your qualifications. Would you be available for an interview this afternoon?" My heart jumped. "Yes, absolutely. What time works best?" "Could you be here by 5 p.m.? The address is 2847 East Bay Street. It's the large colonial home with the iron gates." I knew the area. East Bay Street was where Charleston's old money lived, in historic mansions that had been in families for generations. Whatever this Mr. Blake did for work, he was clearly very successful. "I'll be there," I said, already mentally planning what to wear. After hanging up, I realized I hadn't even asked basic questions about the client or his specific needs. But something told me this opportunity was exactly what I needed to get back on my feet. For the first time since Lucas had walked out, I felt a flicker of hope. The house at 2847 East Bay Street was even more impressive than I had imagined. The colonial mansion sat behind ornate iron gates, surrounded by ancient oak trees draped in Spanish moss. As I walked up the cobblestone path to the front door, I felt intimidated by the obvious wealth on display. This was the kind of place where Charleston's elite lived, generations of old Southern money. Catherine Morrison answered the door before I could knock. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and the kind of polished appearance that spoke of efficiency and professionalism. She wore a navy blue dress that was expensive but understated. "Miss Hartwell, please come in," she said, leading me through a foyer with soaring ceilings and an elaborate crystal chandelier. "Mr. Blake is waiting in his study." As we walked through the house, I noticed the mix of antique furniture and modern accessibility modifications. Ramps had been installed alongside staircases, and doorways had been widened. Everything was done tastefully, preserving the home's historic character while making it functional for someone with mobility challenges. "Mr. Blake was injured in a boating accident 2 years ago," Catherine explained as we walked. "He's been confined to a wheelchair since then. He's a very private person and values discretion above all else. The previous caregiver left rather suddenly last month, and he's been quite particular about finding the right replacement." She stopped in front of a heavy oak door and knocked softly before opening it. "Mr. Blake, Miss Hartwell is here for the interview." The man sitting behind the mahogany desk was not what I had expected. Harrison Blake appeared to be in his mid-40s, with dark hair that was graying at the temples and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess everything around him. His wheelchair was a high-end model, clearly custom-made, and despite his disability, he projected an aura of power and control. "Miss Hartwell," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Please have a seat. Catherine has shown me your credentials, and they're quite impressive. Tell me, what brings you to seek private care work?" I took a breath, deciding to be honest without revealing too much personal detail. "I recently left my position at Charleston General Hospital, and I'm looking for a new opportunity. I've always been drawn to one-on-one patient care, rather than the hospital environment." "I see." His eyes studied me carefully. "This position requires living on the property. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? My previous caregiver found the isolation challenging." "I'm actually looking for housing as well, so the live-in arrangement would be perfect for my current situation," I said. Harrison nodded slowly. "The work can be demanding. I require assistance with transfers, medication management, and physical therapy exercises. I also travel frequently for business and would need you to accompany me. The compensation reflects these requirements." He named a figure that made my eyes widen. It was more than I had made at the hospital, even with overtime. "When would you be able to start?" he asked. Immediately, I replied, perhaps too quickly. A small smile crossed his face. Excellent. Catherine will show you to the guest house and explain your duties in detail. Welcome to the team, Miss Hartwell. My first day as Harrison Blake's caregiver started at 6 a.m. Catherine had given me a detailed schedule the night before, along with keys to both the main house and the guest house where I would be living. The guest house was small but elegant, with a bedroom, kitchenette, and sitting area. It was furnished better than any apartment I had ever lived in, and for the first time in days, I felt like maybe things were looking up. I entered the main house through the side door that connected to a mudroom adjacent to Harrison's bedroom suite. The entire first floor had been converted into his living space, with the master bedroom, a private bathroom with accessibility features, a home office, and a small kitchen. Catherine had explained that Harrison preferred to maintain as much independence as possible and only needed assistance with specific tasks. Good morning, Mr. Blake, I said, knocking on his bedroom door at exactly 6 a.m. Come in, Emma, he called. I had asked him to use my first name, wanting to establish a more personal rapport with my patient. Harrison was already awake, sitting up in bed with his laptop open. Even in the early morning, he projected the same commanding presence I had noticed during our interview. He was wearing a white cotton t-shirt, and I could see the evidence of the physical therapy he had been doing. His upper body was well developed, compensating for the loss of function in his legs. How did you sleep? I asked, approaching his bedside to help him transfer to his wheelchair. Well enough, he replied. I'm usually up early anyway. Business doesn't stop just because I'm in a wheelchair. As I helped him with his morning routine, I learned more about Harrison's life. He was the founder and majority owner of Driftshade Limited, a technology company that specialized in accessibility software. The irony wasn't lost on me that his own accident had occurred just as his company was developing new products for people with disabilities. The business has actually grown since my accident, he explained, as I helped him navigate to the kitchen. There's something about having personal experience with accessibility challenges that makes the work more meaningful. I prepared his medications while he made coffee, a task he insisted on doing himself. Catherine had given me detailed charts of his medication schedule, which included pain management, muscle relaxants, and supplements for bone health. Everything was precisely organized, and I could see that Harrison valued control and order in all aspects of his life. I have a business meeting here this afternoon, he mentioned as we went over the day's schedule. An old associate is coming by to discuss a potential partnership. I'll need you to be available but unobtrusive. Some of my business relationships require a certain level of privacy. Of course, I said. I understand the importance of discretion. The morning passed smoothly. I assisted Harrison with his physical therapy exercises, which he performed with the dedication of an athlete. His determination was impressive, even when I could see that some of the movements caused him discomfort. During our break, he showed me around his home office, which was equipped with the latest assistive technology. I designed most of these modifications myself, he said proudly. When you can't move the way you used to, you have to find new ways to accomplish the same goals. As the afternoon approached, I noticed Harrison becoming more focused and perhaps slightly tense. He spent extra time reviewing documents on his computer and made several phone calls in a voice too low for me to overhear. When I brought him lunch at 1 p.m., he barely touched it. Your meeting is at 3 p.m., correct? I asked, trying to gauge his mood. Yes. And Emma, I want to emphasize again how important confidentiality is in my business dealings. What you see and hear in this house stays in this house. That's not just a request. It's a requirement of your employment. His tone was more serious than it had been all day, and something about it made me uneasy. But I nodded and assured him that I understood completely. At 2:45 p.m., I was in the kitchen cleaning up from lunch when I heard the front doorbell ring. Harrison had positioned himself in his study, and I could hear him wheeling toward the front of the house to answer the door. Right on time, I heard him say as the front door opened. Then I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. Good to see you again, Harrison. I hope you're ready to discuss our arrangement." It was Lucas. My hands froze on the dish I was washing as Lucas's voice carried through the house. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, the stress of the past few days playing tricks on my mind. But as I heard Harrison and Lucas talking in the foyer, there was no mistaking my ex-fiancé's voice. "Let's go to my study," Harrison said. "We have a lot to discuss." I quietly dried my hands and moved closer to the kitchen doorway, trying to understand what was happening. What could Lucas possibly have to do with Harrison Blake? Lucas worked in marketing for a small firm downtown, nowhere near the tech industry, and he had never mentioned knowing anyone with Harrison's level of wealth and influence. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of this impossible coincidence. The timing was too perfect, too convenient. I had been abandoned by Lucas just days ago, desperately needed work, and somehow found the perfect job with someone who knew him. The probability was astronomical. I crept quietly toward Harrison's study, staying in the hallway where I couldn't be seen, but could hear their conversation. What I heard made my stomach drop. "So, she took the job," Lucas was saying, his voice carrying a tone of satisfaction. "I told you she would. Emma's always been predictable that way." "The timing was perfect," Harrison replied. "Having her previous caregiver leave so suddenly worked out well for our purposes." Previous caregiver leave suddenly? Catherine had mentioned that the last caregiver had left abruptly, but she hadn't provided details. Now I was beginning to understand why. "You're sure she doesn't suspect anything?" Lucas asked. "How could she? As far as Emma knows, this is all a coincidence. She has no idea we've been planning this for months." My hands began to shake as the full scope of what I was hearing sank in. They had been planning this. Lucas's abandonment, my desperate job search, this perfect position that had appeared exactly when I needed it most. None of it was coincidence. "When do you want to implement the next phase?" Harrison asked. "Give it a week or two. Let her get comfortable. Let her guard down. Then we plant the evidence. A few missing prescription medications, maybe some jewelry from your bedroom. Nothing too obvious at first, but enough to establish a pattern." I pressed my hand to my mouth to keep from gasping out loud. They were planning to frame me for theft. "The important thing is documentation," Lucas continued. "We need to make sure there's a clear timeline of her having access to these items. Once we have enough evidence, we call the police. A theft conviction, especially involving controlled substances, will destroy her nursing license permanently." "And that's what you want?" Harrison asked. "To destroy her career completely?" "Emma humiliated me by making our relationship public knowledge around town. Everyone knows she was supposed to be my wife. When I ended things, it made me look weak, like I couldn't control my own woman. I need her to understand what happens when you embarrass the Bennett family name." The Bennett family name. Lucas's family owned a small chain of restaurants around Charleston, hardly the kind of empire that warranted this level of vindictiveness. But I was beginning to understand that this wasn't really about family honor. It was about Lucas's ego and his need to punish me for existing after he no longer wanted me. "The plan is solid," Harrison said. "Having you recommend her for the position gives us credibility when we report the thefts. A disgruntled ex-employee recruited by her former fiancé. It looks like we were trying to help her and she betrayed our trust." "Perfect. In 6 months, Emma Hartwell will be unemployable in healthcare, probably facing criminal charges, and completely dependent on whatever charity she can find. She'll never be able to rebuild her life after this." I backed away from the door on trembling legs, my mind reeling from what I had just learned. This wasn't just about revenge for our broken relationship. This was about destroying my entire future. I made it back to the kitchen without being detected, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold onto the counter. Everything I thought I knew about the past few days was a lie. Lucas hadn't found someone else and abandoned me impulsively. He had orchestrated this entire situation to destroy my life systematically. The worst part was realizing how perfectly they had played me. I had been so grateful for this job, so relieved to find something that solved all my immediate problems. The generous salary, the beautiful guest house, the convenient timing. It had all been too good to be true because it wasn't true at all. I needed to think clearly, but panic was clouding my judgment. They were planning to plant evidence of theft and then report me to the police. Once I was arrested, my nursing license would be suspended pending investigation. Even if I was eventually cleared of criminal charges, the mere accusation would make me virtually unemployable in healthcare. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. I had overheard their plan. Moving quickly but quietly, I went to my purse and pulled out my phone. I opened the voice recording app and checked the settings to make sure it would capture audio clearly. If they were going to plant evidence against me, I needed evidence against them. I could hear Lucas and Harrison still talking in the study, but their voices were lower now, more casual. They seemed to be wrapping up their business discussion and moving on to social conversation. I realized I needed to position myself where I could record their next planning session. "Emma?" Harrison called from the study. "Could you bring us some coffee?" My heart jumped, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Of course, Mr. Blake. I'll be right there." I prepared a coffee service with trembling hands, trying to appear normal while my mind raced with possibilities. I needed to act natural around both of them while secretly documenting their conspiracy. One wrong move, and they would know I had discovered their plan. When I entered the study carrying the coffee tray, Lucas looked up at me with a smile that now seemed sinister rather than familiar. "Emma, what a surprise to see you here." "Lucas," I said, managing to keep my voice level. "I didn't know you knew Mr. Blake." "Oh, we go way back," Lucas said casually. "I was actually the one who recommended you for this position. When Harrison mentioned he needed a new caregiver, I thought of you immediately, especially given your recent circumstances." The way he said circumstances made my skin crawl. He was enjoying this, getting pleasure from seeing me in what he thought was a vulnerable position. "That was very thoughtful of you," I said, setting down the coffee service. "I really appreciate the recommendation." "Of course," Lucas replied. "I want to see you land on your feet after everything that happened. I know the breakup was difficult, but I'm sure you understand it was for the best." Harrison watched this exchange with interest, and I could see him evaluating my reactions. I needed to give them nothing that would make them suspicious. "I'm very grateful for this opportunity," I said to Harrison. "The position has been exactly what I needed." "I'm glad to hear that," Harrison said smoothly. "Lucas spoke very highly of your work ethic and integrity. I'm sure we'll have a very productive working relationship." Integrity. The word felt like a slap coming from someone who was planning to frame me for theft. I excused myself from the room, but as I left, I heard Lucas say quietly to Harrison, "She's already completely trusting. This is going to be easier than we thought." I walked calmly back to the kitchen, but inside I was burning with determination. They thought they had me exactly where they wanted me, vulnerable and unsuspecting, but I was going to turn their own plan against them. Over the next 3 days, I became a detective in my own life. I documented everything, every conversation, every task, every moment I was alone in different parts of Harrison's house. I photographed the contents of his medicine cabinet, jewelry box, and desk drawers, creating timestamps that would prove exactly what was there when I arrived. My phone became my constant companion, discreetly recording conversations whenever Lucas visited, which he did every day under the pretense of checking on how I was settling in. During these visits, I learned more details about their plan. They intended to start with small items, a prescription bottle with a few pills missing, a piece of jewelry moved from its usual location, building a case gradually over several weeks. "We don't want it to look obvious," I heard Lucas tell Harrison during one of their planning sessions. "Emma's smart enough to be suspicious if too much goes missing at once." Harrison agreed. "The beauty of this approach is that by the time she realizes what's happening, there will already be a documented pattern, her word against both of ours." with me as the victim and you as the character witness who reluctantly had to recommend against her. But their biggest mistake was underestimating me. While they saw me as a helpless victim, I was methodically building a case against them. I had hours of recorded conversations, photographs of all valuables in their original positions, and detailed logs of my daily activities. The breakthrough came when Harrison mentioned something that made me realize the full scope of their conspiracy. The previous caregiver was getting suspicious, he said to Lucas, during what they thought was a private conversation. She started asking too many questions about why certain items kept going missing from other parts of the house. We had to get rid of her before she could cause problems. So I wasn't their first victim. They had done this before, perfecting their system of framing caregivers for theft. The woman who had held this job before me had likely been destroyed by the same scheme they were planning to use against me. That's when I knew I couldn't just expose their plan against me. I needed to expose everything they had done. The key to unraveling their entire operation came from an unexpected source: Harrison's daughter. I discovered Gabriella Blake's existence while researching Harrison online, trying to understand more about my enemy. She was 26 years old, lived in Atlanta, and according to social media, had been estranged from her father for the past 3 years. Her last public post about him was bitter, mentioning how he had driven away another good person with his paranoid accusations. I realized she might be referring to a previous caregiver. I reached out to Gabriella through a carefully worded private message, explaining that I was her father's current caregiver and had some concerns about the situation. Within hours, she called me. "You need to get out of there immediately," she said without preamble. "My father has destroyed the lives of at least 3 women in the past 2 years. He frames them for theft, ruins their careers, and then acts like the victim." "But why?" I asked. "What does he gain from this?" "Control," Gabriella said bitterly. "My father can't stand the idea that he needs help from anyone. So he hires caregivers, then systematically destroys them to prove that everyone who gets close to him will eventually betray him. It validates his worldview that he can't trust anyone." And she told me about Patricia, the caregiver before the one before me, who was now facing criminal charges in another state after Harrison had her arrested for stealing prescription medications. And about Jennifer, who had lost her nursing license after Harrison accused her of taking family jewelry. "The worst part is that he's gotten away with it because he's rich and respected, and these women are just healthcare workers without the resources to fight back properly," Gabriella continued. "But this time is different," I said. "This time I have evidence." When I explained what I had recorded and documented, Gabriella was quiet for a long moment. "I want to help you," she finally said. "I want to help you destroy him." 2 weeks later, I sat in a conference room at the Charleston Police Department with Detective Patricia Wells, my attorney James Morrison, and Gabriella Blake. Spread across the table were printed transcripts of the recorded conversations, photographs of Harrison's valuables in their original positions, and sworn statements from Patricia and Jennifer, the previous caregivers who had been framed. "This is one of the most elaborate fraud schemes I've seen," Detective Wells said, reviewing the evidence. "The systematic nature of it, the way they targeted vulnerable women who needed work, it's particularly cruel." The recordings of Lucas and Harrison planning my downfall played through speakers in the room. Hearing their voices discussing how to destroy my life was still difficult, but knowing that justice was finally coming made it bearable. "We have enough evidence for multiple felony charges," my attorney confirmed. "Conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false police reports, criminal harassment, and potentially racketeering given the pattern of behavior." Gabriella had been instrumental in building the case. She had kept detailed records of her father's behavior over the years, documenting his paranoid accusations and the pattern of caregivers who had left under mysterious circumstances. Her testimony about his character and history of manipulation would be crucial in court. The arrests happened simultaneously. Harrison was taken into custody at his house, while Lucas was arrested at his office, both charged with multiple felonies. The local news covered the story extensively, focusing on how two privileged men had systematically targeted and destroyed the lives of working women for their own psychological gratification. Within days, Patricia and Jennifer had attorneys and were pursuing civil suits for damages. The nursing board reviewed their cases and began the process of reinstating their licenses. Harrison's company, Driftshade Limited, faced investigations from multiple agencies as authorities looked into whether the business had been used to facilitate the fraud scheme. Lucas lost his job immediately when the charges became public. His family's restaurant business faced boycotts from customers who were disgusted by his treatment of women. The Bennett family name, which he had been so concerned about protecting, became synonymous with cruelty and manipulation throughout Charleston. Harrison's conviction led to a 5-year prison sentence and the forfeiture of significant assets to pay restitution to his victims. His house on East Bay Street was sold to cover legal fees and damages. Gabriella used her portion of the settlement to start a foundation, providing legal assistance to healthcare workers who had been wrongfully accused of crimes by their employers. As for me, I returned to nursing with a renewed sense of purpose and a deeper understanding of how predatory people could exploit those in vulnerable positions. The experience had been traumatic, but it had also shown me a strength I didn't know I possessed. I had faced down 2 men who thought they could destroy me simply because they had more power and resources. And I had won. Standing outside the courthouse after Harrison and Lucas were sentenced, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. What had started as the worst betrayal of my life had ultimately led to justice not just for me, but for all the women who had been victimized by their scheme. Sometimes the best revenge is simply ensuring that the truth comes to light, and that those who abuse their power face the consequences of their actions.